with the with the video?
Yes.
Okay. And I've got the recorder going, so we're ready to go, John.
Right, good. Good evening, everyone. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Montclair Planning Board. Excuse me, notice of this meeting has been given in accordance with the New Jersey Open Public Meetings Act and provided by posting a copy of the notice on the first floor of the municipal building, by sending a copy to our newspaper that's designated for our notices, also electronically posted on the township's website, and also posted on the main access door to the municipal building. We are being broadcast live on channel 34 and stream live and will be available on demand on YouTube. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning that the board has powers and procedures resembling a court of law, and we are obligated to objectively determine facts and to draw conclusions from them in order to provide the basis for official action. Any questions or comments must be limited to those issues that the board can legally consider in reaching a decision, and appropriate decorum for a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. Members of the public will be automatically placed on mute until such time during the meeting where it is appropriate for public questions or comments. At that time, members of the public will be unmuted and they may provide verbal questions or comments as appropriate. And if for some reason we cannot connect for verbal comment, we will also accept questions directed to Ms. Talley, the board secretary, via the chat or question or answering feature on the WebEx platform, or by emailing Ms. Talley at jtalley@montclairnjusa.org. Again, that's jtalley@montclairnjusa.org. First thing up for this evening is consideration is, or procedure rather, is our roll call. And I'm here.
Vice Chair Brodock,
I'm here.
Mayor Spiller,
Present.
Mr. Cook is excused. Councillor Schlager is excused. Ms. Willis,
Here.
Mr. Rooney,
Here.
Mr. Ianwali,
Here.
Ms. Lockman,
Here.
and Mr. Gilmer is excused.
All right. Next, we have minutes from our March 8th meeting.
I didn't receive any corrections or changes to the minutes. So does anybody have any changes to make at this time? If not, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain.
Okay.
All right. And that brings us to the continuation of the hearing on the application of Montclair Acquisition Partners, LLC, for the Orange Road parking deck.
Chairman, when I'm recused from this, so I'll be signing off. And then if there's any new business or anything after this hearing, if you need my attendance, if you text or email me, that'd be great.
All right, Tony, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Troutner, I made you a panelist. And your
Thank
video
you.
is working and I hear you. Okay. Who do you want me to bring into the meeting?
So we have with us tonight, so Brian Barry and Joe Casillo from Montclair Acquisition Partners. We also have Kristen Sokic from Pro Park America. We have James Miller, our professional planner. Michelle Bryhoff from Mazer Engineering, who previously testified as a traffic engineer, is here. And Tim Tracy, the engineer that testified regarding the plans, is also here. I think I got everybody.
Okay. All right, so I made all of your experts panelists as well, so that they are not muted or can unmute themselves.
Great.
So go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening, and we're here again on behalf of Montclair Acquisition Partners in conjunction with our application for minor site plan approval concerning certain changes to the Orange Road deck. When last we were here, there was a request that we revisit the valet parking plan that Mr. Sokich had been testifying at that time, inasmuch as the valet plan that Mr. Sokich was showing in his report was an illustrative drawing and was not actually drawn to scale on full-size plans. Since that meeting, we have submitted in advance of this evening a full-size set of plans reflecting the valet. In addition, Mr. Sokich has submitted an updated parking report. And Janice, my apologies, I don't know what we were marking those two exhibits or what we're up to now. And I know Mr. Giosa has submitted an updated report as well. So.
Okay, I marked the parking plan dated March 8th, 2021 by ProPark is A17. A18 are the revised sheets A102, 103, 104 prepared by Desmond. And A19 is Mr. Giosa's report dated March 17th, 2021.
Great. With that, and Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd ask Kristen Sokich to provide some testimony regarding the amendments to the parking plan and his and as it impacts the testimony that was given at the last meeting.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Sokich, are you here, I hope?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes.
me? Okay.
Can you hear
good
me?
evening. Good evening, board.
Mr. Sokich, can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Mr. Sokich, this is Arthur Neese. I can't actually see you, but I do want to remind you that you testified at the last hearing, and therefore tonight you remain under oath. Do you acknowledge that?
I do.
Thank you.
So now, Mr. Sokich, I'm sorry, Arthur, did I cut you off?
No, I'm done. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, great. So, Mr. Sokich, did you prepare a revised parking plan dated March 8th in advance of tonight's proceedings?
I did, that is correct.
Good. And was that plan in part based upon the updated plan prepared by Desmond Engineering, sheets A102, A103, A104, which I believe Ms. Talley just indicated has been marked A18 in these proceedings?
That is correct.
And those updated Desmond plans are included on the last page of your March 8th parking plan, as I recall correctly?
That is also correct.
Great. So if you could you just walk the board through the revisions to your parking plan that are relevant to your testimony from last time we were here?
Sure. I'll just give you a brief overview of the tables that are on the screen right now. There's three tables. The original table showed the capacities of each level of the garage when it had the lift and slide, which was never implemented. In that table, you'll notice that there were 614 spaces. Of those 614, 116 have not been realized, which basically left us with a working capacity of 498. The entire garage has been operating on a sub-park basis since 2016, except for the fifth floor. The fifth floor, there's a arrangement with the MC Hotel for them to have valets bring guest cars over to the garage on a valet basis, and they do stacked parking when necessary on the fifth floor. The second chart shows the proposed new capacity without the lift and slide, but expanding the deck a little bit to accommodate more vehicles in the footprint of where the lift and slide once was. If you look at that chart, you'll see that the new capacity is 574 cars, which is approximately 40 less cars than the original table showed based on the original approval. And the third chart on the next page, if you scroll down a little bit, yeah, that's it. Okay, so this chart was basically put together because of concerns about peak times when there may be additional cars needing to be parked, and the concern that the cell park inventory may fill up, and how would we handle the overload. So based on that, we looked at how the garage currently operates, and the lower floors are the floors that really get used the most, right? The first floor, the second floor, the third floor, and to a lesser extent, the fourth floor. The rooftop is barely ever used. You might find one or two cars up there that are stored. The fifth floor is the hotel. Also, you know, they operate at less than 50% capacity. So what we felt the best model to operate in would be to continue to allow the first, second, and third floor to operate on a cell park basis. Those are pretty much our regular users, people that live in the Valley and Bloom complex, people that work for the Board of Ed, people that utilize the office and the retail spaces in the entire complex there. So we tried not to affect them with this valet plan. And our idea was, should it become necessary to valet the fourth and sixth floor, bringing the capacity of the garage from the 574 in the new layout all the way up to 692.
Now, Mr. Sokich, just to stop you for just one moment. So you indicated on the prior table that the proposed garage capacity with the slab extension is 574. I believe we previously indicated that that number was 550. Is that correct?
That is correct. But with the, yeah.
Right. If you could just explain, you know, where we suddenly found 24 more spaces.
Right. So I think when this was originally put together, we were just inventorying the spaces that were on floors 1, 2, 3, 4, and the rooftop, excluding the fifth floor, which the hotel uses. But since the build out affects the fifth floor as well, and directly affects the capacity of the overall garage, we found that we could fit an additional number of cars on that floor. I believe the number was 24, and included it in this updated plan to show the true capacity of the overall garage.
And that's with those cars being valet parked on the fifth floor, correct?
Correct.
Which is what the fifth floor is at all times for the hotel, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So now, Mr. Sokich, could you, I didn't mean to cut you off, if you could just continue, and in particular, I guess, walk the board through the updated, Desmond drawings, which, just to lead to, the reason these were prepared was in part to show that the cars would fit without, being placed, where columns are. Is that correct?
Correct. So these drawings were professionally done by an engineer that took into account the column placement, made slight adjustments to show a more accurate picture of how the cars would be laid out in a valet parking scenario. So The idea of valet parking is we're going to know in advance when there's events. Prior to COVID-19 taking place, the hotel was open for a good 5 months. We've had over 40 events from the hotel that we had cars park in the garage. And during that time period, we were able to meet the needs of the hotel without affecting the capacity of the garage. The most cars that we've ever seen from the hotel in the garage were 153, and that was during their grand opening. We've had over a dozen bar mitzvahs. We've had 3 or 4 weddings. We've had reunions, parties, meetings. And there's never been an issue with capacity where we've had a valet in other parts of the garage, other than the grand opening, which was, an outlier, probably once in a lifetime event for the hotel. But this plan was put together based on, the possibility of other large events taking place. And the idea is that, cars would be directed to go up to the 6th floor. We would have signage throughout directing folks to go up there. There would be 8 people on duty. We would have a valet supervisor, a staff of 6, in addition to the location manager. We would control the pickup and drop off. The elevator on the 6th floor there'd be a stanchion. So when people were coming back, there'd be a little waiting area there. We would control the aisleways. We would control the ramps. We would stack park cars as they came in. As folks are pulling into the garage, as is pretty traditional in any valet garage that you go to, they would be asked, when do they think they would be returning? Anybody that says they'd be returning soon, within an hour, 2 hours, we would look to park their cars up front. Anybody saying, oh, I'm going to be all night, I might be, 4 or 5 hours, we would look to park them in the deeper parts of the valet inventory. This just helps us organize better and get cars out more quickly. We would inform people that they have the ability to text for their car in advance, so that if they were at an event at the hotel, they wouldn't have to wait until they actually physically came to the garage. They could text us. We would be able to identify their car by the text, and we would stage their car appropriately in the queue to minimize wait times. And we also have the capability to have them prepay for parking. So instead of, coming into the deck and paying while they're there, they could prepay, from the hotel or wherever they want on a mobile app. So these are all different things that we do to kind of mitigate wait times and to make for a more friendly customer experience as they park and retrieve their vehicles. Once the 6th floor fills up, we would go down to the 4th floor, and it would be the same procedure. Nothing really would change other than the fact that, we're operating on a different level of parking in there.
And Mr. Sokich, referring you to the updated Desmond plans for the 4th and the 6th floor, just to highlight for the board, the areas indicated in yellow, that's indicates kind of stalls, almost, if you will, where valeted vehicles would go.
Correct. So that's just showing the configuration of the stacked parking. And then, the blue areas and the green areas are pickup, drop-off places and aisleways for cars to come in and out. And the red area is where the customers would wait for their vehicle on retrieval. And
your opinion that you could operate a valet operation with the number of cars indicated, or up to the number of cars indicated. I think on the 4th floor it's 150 vehicles, and on the 6th floor 129 vehicles, safely and efficiently with this configuration.
Correct. You know, we do this type of a parking operation all over town, not so much Montclair, but over, around the New York metropolitan area. It's pretty typical in commuter lots, event locations, anywhere where there's a shortage of parking supply and you're looking to pack as many cars in as possible. This is the type of configuration we would use. You know, it may look a little daunting when you're looking at 8 cars across, but at the end of the day, it's very doable. We do this all over the place. It's done in Hoboken at the Observer Highway lot, 8 or 9, 10 cars deep. It's not unusual at all. And the thing about moving the cars is you're not, with the number of people we're going to have on staff, if by chance somebody came back to the deck, unannounced, let's say there was whatever, they just showed up and they needed their car and one of their cars happened to be parked way in the back, we can move 7 cars to get that 8th car out. We're not moving the cars, parking them, and then getting the car out. We're basically moving them out into the aisleway. Valets are sitting in the car. When that car comes out, the rest of the valets are piling the rest of the cars right back into that same aisle that the original car came out. And it literally takes, seconds, not minutes. It's a pretty quick process. The valets work as a team. And, if they find out that, a car needs to be reparked, there's usually adequate time in between the start of the event and the end of the event where, we'll go through the vehicle inventory, double check the valet tickets for retrieval time. And if we need to readjust cars based on the fact that maybe a bunch of them came in at once and weren't parked to the most effective space, we use the downtime to rearrange the cars accordingly.
So now, Mr. Sokic, you indicated a moment ago that you have some prior experience, with this type of valet operation. I think you indicated a deck at Observer Highway in Hoboken. Is it fair to say you drew on your prior experience in overseeing valet operations in similar parking decks to prepare this plan?
Yes, I mean I've been in the business for 25 years. I've been associated with probably 700 different parking operations in the metropolitan area. I currently oversee 150 operations with 1,300 employees, many of them valet, where we do the same exact thing that you see here. Now,
Mr. Sokic, did you have a chance to review Mr. Gios's March 17th, 2021 comment letter, which I believe has been marked A19 in conjunction with these proceedings?
I did.
And I wanted to ask you a few questions about that. Mr. Giosa indicates, particularly in the beginning of the letter and at comment 1, a concern regarding that the valet layouts are aggressive with many rows stacked 8 or 9 deep in one area of the roof level. And I'm editorializing it. My thought is that this comment expresses some concern about the ability for the valet operators to retrieve vehicles in a safe and timely fashion based upon available storage or staging areas for the vehicles being repositioned. I'm using some of Mr. Giosa's words, but you may have already answered this, but I just wanted to see if you could speak to that a little further, that concern.
Sure. So I did mention some of the things that we do, like the text for your car and the staging of the cars and prepaying. But, in my opinion, from doing this for so many years, when you're working in a valet operation, every location is different. In this situation, all the cars are right there. We're not bringing cars from 2 blocks away or from 3 or 4 floors down. There's no vehicle elevators or car lifts being used. So in essence, the fact that we're able to get to the car quickly speeds up the service time. And if by some chance we needed to increase the throughput of getting cars out, we would simply increase the valet level. So I'm proposing having a staff of 8 on an event like this. But if we found that, we needed to go to 10 or 12, we would just increase the number of valets, and that would make up for the time increment that it would take to get a car out.
And Mr. Sokich, with respect to, I think it's comment number 3, and it's really part B of that. There's I guess a question or concern regarding, the control of ramps and queuing areas to ensure pedestrian vehicular safety. Can you speak to that? Is that related to the staffing that you just referred to?
I can. So, we're not just parking the cars, we're controlling the aisles and we're controlling the ramps. And all the valets are going to have walkie-talkies. So if we're pulling a car out and we need to hold up the traffic that may be leaving or coming in momentarily, the valets communicate with one another. There's somebody that controls each floor and is responsible for the traffic flow. So there would be good communication going on amongst them to control the flow, in addition to getting the cars out. In terms of, the physical structure of the building, it is what it is. It's what we inherited. It's what was always there. I could tell you that we haven't had any accidents, either with the hotel valet or sub parkers. There are some tight turns when you're coming down those ramps. But that's one of the reasons we have a 5-mile-per-hour speed limit. Safety and security of people driving in the garage is paramount. And to date, we haven't had any incidents that have to do with folks driving on the ramps or around turns or anything like that.
Now, Mr. Sokich, referring you to comment number 4 of Mr. Gios's report. There's Mr. Gios expresses that that the deck should be capable of accommodating peak parking demand loads in the 460 to 687 range. I think 687 being the high end of what Mr. Gios's prior report indicated was what he thought could be a highly attended or a high demand a special event at the hotel. Can you speak to Mr. Gios's comments where I'm going to paraphrase that, expressing a concern that because of potential constant inflow, outflow, and repositioning of cars, the practical understood valet capacity of garages is typically in the 90 to 95% range. Could you comment on that?
That hasn't really been my experience, and I don't know that to be a rule of thumb. I've operated garages that operated 100%, less than 100%, 50%. The garage is built with X amount of space. It has drive aisles. It has entry and exit lanes. I don't see that really being an issue. And the other reason I don't see it being an issue is the type of parking that would take place in this scenario where we had to utilize valet doesn't lend itself to constant ins and outs. It lends itself to waves of cars coming and then waves of cars leaving, and they don't necessarily overlap. It's like going to a ball game or something where, everybody's coming in 2 hours before the game and everybody's leaving, half hour before it ends and an hour after it. The type of events that are taking place at the MC Hotel are like that. If you have a bar mitzvah, people are going to arrive a little early. You have a few people leave before the event officially ends, but then you'll have most people leaving when it does end. And that's a different type of, scenario. I think the scenario Jerry is talking about is more particular to maybe like a retail environment during Christmas, where you get tons of people coming in, coming out at the same time. But I don't see that being the case here. There is overlaps in usage at this garage, but it's actually a positive overlap because you've got residents who take their cars out during the day and then Board of Ed and office workers, coming in to backfill those spaces. Is there a percentage of cars that overlap when the residents are going out in the morning and Board of Ed employees are coming in? Yes. Is it manageable? I think so. The history of this garage, we have 5 years worth of data, 5 years. And the first 4 years, our biggest day, we had 289 cars. When the whole hotel opened up, we had one day only, where we did 413 cars. We never did more than 338 before that. And the 413 was on the grand opening, right? Our working capacity, even without the lift and slide, was 498 cars. So even on the grand opening night, we were still only at like 82% of capacity. We had other challenges in that 2 exit lanes weren't, being used because of lift and slide construction, and there was some other work going on. But at this point, once this garage is finally finished, with the addition of the expanding of the spaces, we're not even going to have that challenge. In my opinion, I don't see us ever going to this valet situation. It would have to be some really huge, like a huge wedding at the MC, a parade, Bloomfield Avenue, and maybe something else. The numbers just, our average capacity is like 50%, we're in the 200 range. And here we are talking about a capacity of 692.
Mr. Sokich, with respect to the number 692, I just want to get your opinion. I think you previously testified that you thought the garage could get 700, if not more, cars in there with valet techniques. Is that, you don't have to elaborate, but is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. Like I said, we're trying to be customer friendly and not inconvenience people that are regulars in the garage. So this plan is based on part valet on the upper floors and leave the other floors as self-park. If we had to, though, we could easily valet on 3, 2, and 1, and the capacity would probably be up in the 800 range somewhere.
But you think, is your professional opinion or your expert opinion that you could get 692 cars in the garage to operate safely and efficiently based on the proposed plans submitted in conjunction with this hearing?
That's correct. That's what I put on paper, and that's what I believe.
Right. So, Chairman, I think that's all the direct questions I have. I'm sure the board has some questions. I'm sure Mr. Joseph would like to comment. There were a few other comments in Mr. Joseph's letter I can speak to, but given the order of operations, maybe this is the place where we stop and come back to that.
All right. Actually, I would like to hear what Mr. Giosa has to say. At the top. Mr. Giosa?
Chairman, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good, thanks.
So what say you to what you've heard so far?
I've never seen valet operation with the depth of stacking here, 8 or 9 deep, in my career. So I'd be very interested to see an operation with valet stacking this deep. This what I see are almost looks more like like a vehicle storage situation. But I would be interested to see the Observer Highway operation, to see how efficiently that works at 8, 9 deep. Especially if I guess that's near the train station in Hoboken. So possibly when the trains start letting out, I realize this is not the ideal time to make such observations during a pandemic, but it is something I'd be interested in seeing, because I personally have never run across valet stacking this deep. One other comment, Kristen mentioned that their biggest day was was 289. We went there and did an inventory on October 25th of 2019, pre-pandemic, and we observed 320 cars parked. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry, the 289 I referenced was, yeah, it wasn't too, it was earlier in the year, and then we had yeah, okay. Well, in the last year, there were some days where we were over 300. I think I said the highest day was 338. But I hear what you're saying.
and the other thing I mentioned, in my report is that when you do have valet activity happening, when you are digging out cars that are buried 3, 4, 5, 6 deep, those cars that are being pulled out need a place to stage. And there's really, and the only places to stage those cars are in areas marked on the Desmond drawings, either circulation space or pickup drop-off areas. So, so I agree with Kristen that it's going to be localized periods of peak demand. It's not going to be a constant thing all the time, but I do have concerns about peak events that do let out all at the same time. Kristen mentioned there could be a fairly large number of events where there's a kind of a peak exodus at the end of the event to try to get folks in their cars and get people moving. I think there's some issues here. Even with 8 valets, no matter how many people you throw at it, I think it's going to be a challenge. That's just based on what I see in front of me here. But I think some of the comments. I like the idea of putting attendants on the ramps to kind of control traffic, and some of the turns where where folks are going to be directed to valet park their cars on either the 4th or the 6th level. They're going to be interacting with with valet parking activity and so forth. But if they do have attendants on the ramps, I think that's a good thing. I think that's a positive from the previous plan. But that's about it in a nutshell. I almost feel like it's 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag, but if operationally they can demonstrate that that it can be done, I would be very interested to observe such an operation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Giosa. Do members of the board have questions?
Yes, I do. I have a question or two. This is Carol.
Please proceed, Carol.
Okay. I know that Mr. Giosa had mentioned the fire marshals having a evaluation. Was that done, or?
I don't believe so, and I linked that to the issue that I brought up of they have shown aisles where you can access the egress stairs, but again, if there's an operation where you're staging cars in the pickup drop-off areas or the circulation areas, that might be a concern of the fire marshal. That's the only reason that I brought that issue up, because I know the fire marshal tends to be very thorough in their reviews of these things. So I just wanted to make a point of that.
Okay. And for Mr. Sokic, was the From what you're saying, I gathered that the only time that the public customer is going to be in the garage will only be at levels 1 and 3. Is that correct? So that they'll never have to interact with anything above the 3rd level with people who are driving their own cars?
No. So people that park on 1, 2, and 3 They're going to park and, freely move around those floors. Folks that are parking up on the valet floors, they're going to pull up, they'll be greeted, handed a valet ticket. They'll be either escorted or pointed to the direction of where the elevator is. They'll take the elevator or the stairs down.
That's what I was trying to understand, Mr. Hosokich. It seems to me that you're saying that the people who are self-park will use the first three, but then those who are valet will have to go upstairs, that they're not being served on level one. They have to actually go upstairs to the upper levels.
That is correct. So they're gonna valet on the level that they come to. So if they come to the rooftop, we'll valet them on the rooftop. If the rooftop fills and we start to valet on the fourth, then we'll take their car on the fourth, and then when they come back, they would come back to that designated level.
So that's even more complex, that the customer is also having to go up to the fourth and sixth floor in order to get the valet service.
So if you look at it, if you think about it differently, it's actually less complex, because if we were to do the valet from the first floor, you would have valets driving cars, let's say from the roof down 6 levels of garage to a staging area down on 1. This cuts down on the number of valets traversing throughout the entire garage, and actually has the customer coming to the point of drop off to pick up their car, which I think is a much better solution.
I'm not so sure about that, but I won't argue the point at this point. It seems a little complicated to me for the customer driving. A lot of people trying to negotiate those very tough turns. I've been in that garage all the way up to the 6th floor where they have to, it sounds a little more complicated with the number of people who have to be coming and going. But I'll accept that as your opinion.
Thank you.
Here's the question. So let's just think about it being like New Year's Eve, and get a lot of people going to a party at the hotel, paying $500 ticket for 2. They're probably going to go if there's a major snowstorm. Where does the snow go on the roof? Do you lose parking spots?
When it snows,
Yeah.
hasn't been an issue so far. We normally would pile it up. If the pile gets too big, then we would truck it out.
But do you lose parking spots if it snows? How many, if you had a big snowstorm, you'd lose some parking spaces?
Depending on how big the snowstorm was, you may lose some spots, correct?
Any idea how many? Worst case
It's tough to say. I mean, look, if it was a nor'easter, I would imagine, you'd lose, quite a bit, maybe 10, 20 spots. If it's just a regular snowfall, you may not lose any.
And the other question is, where the people stand to pick up their car on the roof, is that enclosed?
It is by the elevator vestibule. So on the 4th floor, it's covered because you're on the 4th floor and you got the 5th floor above you. On the roof, it's not enclosed.
So people, if it's raining, people are standing there in the rain waiting for their car?
If it's raining, I mean, we could take measures to put some protective covering up for a waiting area, maybe pitch like a tent, or put some temporary shelter up there of some type.
Chair Nguyen, interject on a related question. This is Mike Danforth. One of the dynamics that I think is being overlooked, a lot of the valet, large events at the hotel, would customers or visitors to the hotel valet directly from the U-turn within the MC hotel and not drive themselves to the garage at all?
I think a lot of people would, because they do have the porte share there and they have a valet service that services the guests. But, a lot of locals also go to the MC hotel and, they'll pull into the garage themselves. I mean, we've seen that happen actually quite a bit.
Just to follow on with that, those are hotel employees that would be valeting the car to the garage, not your employees, right?
Well, my company also does the valet for the hotel. So, but it is a separate service. The valet operation is based at the hotel. Those employees only valet cars up to the 5th floor, which is designated for the hotel cars. In this situation, in this plan, these would be employees, working for this property, doing the valet on an event basis, on the 4th and 6th floor, separate from the valet that takes place at the porto share by the hotel.
Because one of your contentions is that the valets are all going to be talking to each other and working this out and, doing the best thing they can. But if they're unrelated operations, how does that?
Well, so I could clarify that for you. It's compartmentalized, right? Because it's 2 different ownership groups. But my valets, they all work for the same company. There's going to be coordination and communication going on as much as we need.
Could I just ask, these valets who are working at the hotel, they take a car, where do they take it to?
They take it to the 5th floor. So they drive around, they'll drive around the block, come in through the entrance, and drive it up to 5.
How many valets will the hotel have?
Depends, what you mean for like when they're having an event or just like during the regular course of business?
No, just say for an event. How many valets will the hotel have? And how many will, and I say you, but they're the same company. How many will you have that are operating in the deck itself?
Okay, so this plan envisions 8 valets to satisfy the needs of this deck to park cars on the 4th and 6th floor. The hotel, it depends on the event. If they have a party of 30, it's not going to need a lot of valets. If they have a party of, 200, it'll take a lot more valets. All events are different. They're not all the same size. They're not all the same duration. So it really depends on the size of the event, the length of the event, and then we would staff that event accordingly.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a couple of additional questions?
Kind of curious if John's connection is frozen at the moment, because it seems like his video froze and he seems to be muted. So go ahead, Mr. Neese.
Thank you, Burdock. Up on the screen right now is A104. And I guess that is, I can't really read it from here, but it's, which level is that? 5th level?
No, that's the rooftop.
Rooftop. Okay. So I guess I'm very confused because it seems to me that if my car is the yellow rectangle, which is all the way over on the left and all the way at the top, a valet, someone getting my car out of there, would have to move 3, 6, 7 cars, back them out, or however they're put in, back them out in order for my car to be gotten out if there's a full stack right there, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So where did those 7 or 8 cars go? How were they maneuvered logistically in that area? Because I assume, and you'll have to tell me, that the green area is what, the width of 2 cars, and the blue area is the width of 2 cars? How does that work?
So we would pull the cars out and go down.
That's my question. Where do they go? How do they?
They would go right into that green and blue area on one side. So we would keep open one lane while we temporarily pull the cars out. One valet would get your car, and after he pulled your car out, the other valets would pull the other ones right back in.
So how long, if you can estimate, how long would that process take to remove those 7 or 8 cars in order to get to my car?
In isolation, I don't think it would take more than 3 or 4 minutes.
And the cars that are backed out, assuming they're backed out, they would just queue down the page, so to speak, in the green area.
Correct.
Can
Look, I don't know if you heard the testimony I gave earlier. There's things that we do to try to mitigate this situation. And that's one, when you came to the location, we would ask you when you think you're coming back.
Mr. Sokich, I heard your testimony. I heard it.
Got it.
But I have different questions. So do you have experience with damages to vehicles in your observer highway location? It seems to me that this is a very close situation, and cars, I'm sure your guys are terrific. However, it seems to me, it looks to me like cars have to be damaged somehow. Doors opening, you accidentally run into somebody. What is your level of experience with damages in other very compact situations like the one that's presented here in A104?
Sure. I'm not currently operating Observer Highway, but I used to operate it, and they do park just like this. I have another location in the village of Scarsdale. It's a commuter lot. We park cars just like this. I could tell you recently at Scarsdale, we may average 1 or 2 claims a year, and we're parking cars like this not once a year, every single day, Monday through Friday. Not now during COVID, because nobody wants to take a train anymore, but for the last 10 years, and I'll send you pictures if you want, we're parking deep, and you know, our employees are trained valets. They go through a training program, they get vetted, they're scrutinized. We have, you know, follow-up training that takes place. Yeah, do accidents happen? Of course. Do we keep them to a minimum? As much as we can.
And who, I'm not sure how to ask the question, so forgive me. If a car is damaged in one of these lots, who does the owner of that car look to for recompense?
For compensation?
Yeah.
Arthur, I'm not sure he's actually the right witness for this. I'll let him answer if he knows the answer. I mean, since my client owns the deck, I'm going to guess my client might have an issue in that scenario. But
So
I'll let him answer.
we have a risk management department that handles all our claims. If somebody came in and said, hey, you know, there's a scratch here that wasn't here before I came here, they would fill out a claim. We would send it to our risk manager department, and they would expedite it. If we are at fault, we would pay for the damage. A lot of times people come in, they make false claims. You know, it's not overwhelmingly false. I mean, most claims are legit. But one of the things that the attendants do is when the car pulls up, they do a quick, you know, walk around the car. And if they notice damage, they either take a picture or mark it off on the valet ticket. And they'll say to you, Mr. Smith, or whoever it might be, did you notice that you have a dent on your right rear quarter panel? That type of proactivity tends to limit claims when they actually, you know, are checking the vehicle and pointing it out to customers.
And I guess my last question is there a floor number of employees, valets that will be operating in the parking deck at all times? Or in other words, what's the minimum number of valets who will be in the parking deck at any given point in time, whether there's an event or not?
If there's no event, there's not going to be any valets. We would only do this scenario under an event type of circumstance. There would have to be, you know, an election at the Board of Ed, big Board of Ed meeting, a wedding, you know, something of substance that would require us to valet. Otherwise, we're not valeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the hotel doesn't have valet parking available?
The hotel does have valet parking.
So it's the hotel employees that do the valet parking for the hotel?
For the hotel, correct.
So
I'm speaking to this property here. The hotel is a separate entity from this.
right, but you know, we're trying to understand the fact that it's also a tied to, it's an involved entity. You can't consider one without the other. So We're trying to understand how it's going to work together, if it's going to work together.
I mean, I'm looking.
So I want to understand a little bit more about what you had testified to before earlier. And you said that for this scenario, I recall you made a statement about for this scenario, we based it on having 8 valets. And so I want to understand what were the factors of the scenario that you thought 8 valets would be sufficient for?
Sure. The volume, the number of spaces we could fit.
Can you wait a minute, can you give me numbers instead of saying the volume? Can you give me numbers saying, 400 spaces, 500 spaces, 300 spaces? Because that's where
I'm going to give you numbers right now.
Okay.
For this type of setup where it's compact and it's very close to where the pickup and drop off area is, rule of thumb is 1 valet for every 50 cars.
So on this particular floor, you have, I've got to go back up to your chart.
6th floor, it's 129, Mr. Chairman.
129. So you're saying for 129 cars, 8 would be sufficient? Or is that for the...
Actually less than 8, but we're also going to control the ramps. And then once this floor fills, part of those people are going to go down to 4 and start valeting down there.
So will the hotel be doing the valet on the well, again, I'm sorry, got a little confused by that last interjection because we talked about the 6th level, but what about the 5th level? Who's doing the valet parking on the 5th level when there's an event?
That's the hotel itself.
The hotel has to staff, and they're a completely separate operation from what you're doing?
Correct.
So who's talking to who on the walkie-talkies? And the walkie-talkies, the communication is only going between your staff. It's not going between your staff and the hotel staff.
So
is the traffic flowing? Because isn't there an intermixing of traffic on the ramps?
Well, no different than it would on a regular day. I mean, you've got
no. Well, with an event with hundreds of cars there, it's not going to be any different than it is on a regular day when you've got this wave of cars coming in and out?
No, it's going to be different, but in terms of the utilization of the ramps, I mean, it's just going to be a higher volume. You still have cars coming in and out. But
right,
to get back to
who's going to be controlling the traffic that you mentioned, and your guys are going to be controlling the traffic for your guys and the hotel guys, or what? How are these two systems going to work together?
Mr. Chairman, if I might, and maybe I don't know if this answers the question, Mr. Sokic. So, notwithstanding the separate ownerships, the hotel valets are Pro Park employees, correct?
They are correct.
Yeah.
So you're controlling them?
Correct.
So why when you're answering me are you drawing a distinction? Because that's just confusing. That's just confusing. Never mind. Let me go back. Let me go back to my questions. Okay. So regardless of whether it's the hotel's responsibility or whether it's a special event responsibility, you're controlling all the traffic and all the employees, and you're determining the amount of staff for the 5th and the 6th floor when there's going to be an event.
Correct.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. And so when we have, excuse me, and again, you determine that you need 8 people on the 6th and the 5th floor based on, what did you say the number again was 1 valet per 50 cars?
Correct.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, I apologize for interjecting. I just want to make sure that I think there might be a point here to clarification. Mr. Sokic, you were indicating 8 people would start on the 6th floor and then move to the 4th. There would be additional valets for the 5th, correct?
Yeah, the 5th, the number of valets that it takes to park the hotel cars from the porte cochere to the garage is not 1 per 50 because of the distance. That's a much lower number and a different staffing level. So the 1 to 50 applies to the 6th floor and the 4th floor because the customers drive into the floor. The inventory is right there. The hotel, they're driving on city blocks to get from the hotel into the garage. You know, in their scenario, they may need one valet for every 6 or 8 cars. It's a much lower number because of the distance.
Can I just ask, Mr. Sokic?
Well, I'm confused too, and Carmel, if you don't mind,
No.
you know, that Mr. Troutner only confused me more. Okay, let me ask you this: when there's an event, and we're just talking about when there's an event, a high occupancy event, the valet parking for the event is going to occur on the 6th floor and the 4th floor, and not the 5th floor. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And so the two relevant numbers that we're talking about for capacity are 129 and 150. Correct?
Correct.
So we can't have any more than 279 people attending an event.
That's not true, because usually you get, on average, for an event type of thing, you're
Let's
getting.
say 279 vehicles, all right?
But you're assuming each person
Let's
is
say
driving their own car.
279 vehicles. You
Okay.
can't have more than 279 vehicles for the event,
Correct.
all right? And you can't always assume that everybody's going to travel, ride share. And in terms of the event space at the hotel, if all the event space at the hotel was in use at the same time, what's the number what's the capacity? How many people could be in attendance for a special event on one day if everything was booked?
I don't have that information.
Right, I'm referring this more to Mr. Troutner. If you don't have the number, if you can indicate which one of your witnesses might.
But well, obviously we're not the hotel. Let me answer this, I guess, 2 different ways. One, we were operating off.
You have to know how much that figure is in order to be able to tell us that you're going to be able to park the cars for an event, right?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we intended to rely actually on the board's expert on this one. The board's expert indicated, Mr. Giosa indicated that for a special event, he thought we would need to be able to fit between 560 and 687 cars in this garage. So,
Mr. Giosa, can we bring you into this questioning, and just so that you can clarify, is that correct, and what you base that on? Just so that we understand.
Jerry?
He's muted. He's trying to give you the story, but he's muted. There you go.
Okay.
I unmuted you.
Oh wait, now I think he muted himself.
Okay, are we good now?
Thank you, Mr. Giosa.
Okay, sorry about that. I believe I was basing that on Institute of Transportation Engineers factors. But
Factors based on what? Based on the size of the event rooms, or?
I believe it was the square footage of the event space.
Okay.
I would have to go back into my notes.
And just bear with me here. If that was the case, it would be what the authority that you're quoting is indicating is an average number, or is a number that makes sense based on their history and their research and their studies.
Correct. And I also went back and reviewed some of the testimony from the original Valley and Bloom applications, talking about what the full build out capacities and expected demand would be.
Okay, now is that the number you said was 500? What was the number? 5 something to 6 something?
560 at the low to 687 at the high, and this is for, again, just for special events.
Now, and is that's just taking into account the special event rooms? That's not taking into account the other hotel business. Is that correct?
No, it does include all the other, all the other occupied spaces as well.
So is that with all the occupied spaces occupied, or is that normal average occupancy? Again, just trying to understand the base of the number.
Yeah, we did some shared parking models, Chairman, and we forecasted the uses of all the various components, the 259 Valley and Bloom apartments, the office space, and it was calculated on an hour-by-hour basis.
And it was okay.
Determined at the peak hour.
So that's for the whole structure.
Correct.
Do you have any breakdown that we could get a number attributable to just the event parking for the event space, as opposed to the restaurant or the hotels or the apartments?
The hotel restaurant is 5,000 square feet. The meeting space is 13,000. I'm just looking for.
Do they have conference rooms?
Yes, the ITE factors were based on the number of rooms, but it did include subject sites with meeting space and restaurant space. So it was based on the number of rooms, but it was also based on studies of hotels with restaurants and meeting space.
Okay, but we don't have enough specificity to be able to say, out of that 560 to 687, approximately X, Y, and Z would be attributable to special events as opposed to ordinary hotel operations.
Correct. We didn't drill down that deep. ITE
Okay.
did not break it out in that fashion.
Okay, well then how do we know that the 279 spaces that's going to be valet parked is going to be sufficient for the special events? Because I can see if everybody coming to a special event is going to go into the valet parking, I don't know at what point they're going to say, okay, we're full, now you're going to have to go and try and self-park, because we're supposed to have 692 spaces available. But those spaces the rest of those spaces are on levels 1, 2, and 3, and 5, as opposed to 6 and 4. How does that work? And I guess I would direct that question to the original witness, and Mr. Sokic, in telling us, at what point, how does it switch over, and just how does that operate?
Well, we know when there's events at the hotel in advance, and we could staff accordingly. The folks that are pulling into the garage are not being sent there by the hotel. The hotel has its own valet. When they book events, they tell the folks that are having the events about the valet. These are people that just show up on their own. We don't really know where they're going. I don't know if somebody is going to the hotel or if they're going for dinner somewhere in Montclair.
So how do you know that you're supposed to park them on levels 4 or 6?
Because they're not, levels 2 and 3 are designated for residents, Board of Ed, office people. The first floor is open to the public on a subpark basis. If there's no space on the first floor, they would drive up to 4 or 6 on a regular day and park up there, self-park. And if it was one of these event days, which
Shouldn't you be reserving parking on the 4th or 6th floor on event days just for people who are attending those events?
so
LA?
we our average capacity hardly ever reaches 50%.
I don't want to know about your average capacity. I want to know how you're going to operate this parking deck.
Yeah, okay.
That's
So-
what we're talking about. We're not talking about what happens anyplace else at any other time. We're talking about what's going on at this parking deck and whether this plan is actually realistic. And that's what that's what we're trying to understand.
So we could reserve the 6th floor for event parking easily.
You could. Yes, you could. You could also reserve the 5th, the 3rd, and the 2nd floor. But I mean, how is that the way that you planned it? Is that how you determined that there was going to be adequate space? Or did you drill down that far?
No, we drilled down. So we'll know in advance if let's say it's a Saturday night event, we're going to close off the 6th and the 4th floor earlier to make sure that people don't go up there and self-park. And then when 2 hours before the event, we'll open it up on a valet basis and we valet the cars that come up.
And so I'm going there to an event, okay? And let's say it's a corporate event. And my company is throwing a holiday party at the hotel. And we're throwing it after work. So me and all the rest of my company are showing up at the parking deck, looking to go to this event and have our cars parked, okay? So when we pull up to the entrance of the deck on Orange Road, what's gonna happen?
You'll see a sign, if you're going to the such and such event, please proceed up to the 6th floor.
Okay, so you'll know people, you'll presume anyway that people coming up to the 6th floor are all going to that event. Correct.
I'm not asking them where they're going, but
I
we'll
didn't
have
say that.
signage
I'm
directing
saying
them.
that you're presuming that that's where they're going.
I'm
and
not
so you're-
presuming anything.
Well, I mean, if they're not going to that event, you don't want to park them on the 6th floor, do you?
I'm not
Because then
asking
you're
people.
compromising your space, right? They should be parking on another level,
But
right?
it's no different than any other operating day. We're not
I
asking people where they're
can't
going.
buy that. I can't buy that it's no different than any other operating day when you've got 200 people showing up at 5:05 because they just left the office and they're all arriving at the same time. I've been in one of those situations
Yeah, I'm sure you have. But
where that has happened. And so, that's
the distinction I'm making is we will prepare for the event, but we're not physically asking somebody where they're going.
Mhm. But if you have people up on the 6th floor, don't you want to make sure that they're all going to an event as opposed to, visiting somebody who's at the hotel, or maybe somebody misread the sign or something like that? You don't care.
I don't think so.
Mhm.
I mean, our job, look,
All right.
people have space to park in on the 2nd and 3rd levels that are monthly parkers, and those are designated. So anybody parking in there, their car's got a decal, they've got an access card.
Right. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people coming in to go visit somebody, or who wants to go to the bar.
Okay, so
or wants
those
to go to the
people,
restaurant,
those
or wants to go
people-
shopping.
okay,
And they come in and they're not paying attention, or they misread the sign or whatnot, and they wind up on the 4th floor where you're supposed to be valet parking for this corporate event. And you're not asking them, is that where making sure that that's where they're in the proper place? That's what you're basically telling me.
no, what I'd like to clarify for you is if that's an issue where your corporate event or the hotel feels like they need to reserve spaces for those folks.
You're making the determination about the reserving the spaces.
No.
Corporate event isn't making the determination. Your testimony is that you're staffing and you're providing according to what's going on. And if they're telling you that there's an event that 200 people are going to be showing up to, you've got to provide to park them on the 4th and 6th floor, because there's not enough room on one of those floors by itself to park everybody, right?
If they're going to the hotel, that's a hotel parking issue.
I said if they're going to a special event.
So it's not at the hotel.
It is at the hotel. Everything that we're talking about, Mr. Sokich, is at the hotel.
The hotel has their own
Special
valet
event.
service and their
Mr.
own
Chairman,
floor.
I don't know if this will help. It may not. But what I think, Mr. Sokich,
I'm having a real trouble understanding Mr. Sokich's testimony, because I thought that special events that we're talking about, that this valet parking scheme was designed to accommodate, was supposed to be about special events at the hotel, right?
Well, that's what I want to clarify. So Mr.
But why are you clarifying it and not your witness?
I want to have Mr. Sokich clarify. I just want to try and ask a question to see if it'll help realign the discussion that maybe addresses the question.
Okay.
So there, up on the screen right now is Mr. Jose's report from, I believe, January 5th, and it shows peak parking demand ranges, and you see weekdays 460 to 563 cars. There wouldn't be a need to go to valet in that scenario. But when you get to a special event day, so whether it's that presumably that's on a weekend or a holiday. So now the demand includes all the people who need to park in that deck ordinarily on a weekend or holiday, plus some extra demand related to a special event. It's possible, in Mr. Jose's opinion, I'm putting words in his mouth, apologies, that there could be a high demand based on his ITE calculations of a need for 687 cars to get into the deck. And the question was, when we started this application, with the elimination of the lift and slide, there's a loss of some parking, approximately 40 spaces, actually less if you count zip car spaces, but let's not get into that. With the loss of those 40 spaces because of the loss of the ability to construct the lift and slide mechanism, how would this deck be able to accommodate a demand of 687? And our proposal is that if you count up the number of spaces on the first, the second, the third, the fourth with valet, the fifth with valet, and the sixth with valet, you reach a number of 692. That's more than 687. The deck is sized correctly to handle the high demand, even on a special event that happens on a weekend or a holiday. Mr. Chairman, I think you're trying to drill into questions related to...
Mr. Troutner, I'm trying to understand how these special events work. The numbers that you're referencing, yes, they're demand estimates, all right? Right? And we're very close between the 692 and the 687 as the high demand. And of course, we're looking at this as a worst case scenario because we have to do that. And I'm trying to understand when this special event parking comes into play, which is, I believe it will be coming into play when looks like, you know, if we just talk about about the estimates, it might come into play on a weekend if there's a special event. All right. So if there's a special event or two going on at the hotel, how do we know that we're going to be able to get the 129 and the 150, which makes up 279 spaces of what of this capacity that we're talking about? How do we know that that space is going to be available and that it's going to work? And you've presented us with a sardine can parking plan that's very close, and we're hearing say, well, we'll staff it appropriately, and that we will make sure that we have appropriate, controls in place and such. But it's all very vague, and I'm just wondering, again, in this worst case scenario, how this is going to work and what the practical impact of this is going to be. Because, I understand and I do buy the concept that, yeah, you can jam the cars in there. As somebody who has worked in New York and Newark and taken the trains and driven in, over the past 30 years, I see how you can park cars and, and end to end and jam, cover a lot of put a lot of cars on a little bit of real estate, and put them on lifts and park them, 2 and 3 cars high. But the problems come in not when you have people coming in and out and you have 1 or 2 people, or you've got 5 or 6 people there. The problem comes when you have 10 people arriving at the same time. And special events by their nature, you'll have, as Mr. Sokic pointed out in his testimony, you have this wave coming in and you have this wave coming out. So my concerns are when the wave is coming in and where it's coming out, how is this going to operate? Are people going to be waiting 30 minutes or 40 minutes or half an hour for their cars? If the first people who come in need their cars are buried up against the wall. And likewise, just also trying to understand, if you have a bunch of cars coming in at the same time, we want to make sure that everything can be queued inside of the garage or the parking garage, and that there's not overflowing out onto Orange Road, because Orange Road cannot tolerate any kind of overflow, for cars waiting to turn into the parking garage. So, you've answered some of those questions, questions that I have with my concerns with respect to indicating that you'll have communication and that there'll be, some traffic control. And it sounds very good, but I'm just trying to understand how all of that operates and how it's actually going to work, and how these decisions are going to be made. Because, it sounds like from the testimony that I'm hearing is that you're going to make an estimate, and if that doesn't work, for that event, you're stuck with it, because you're not going to be able to call in people quickly enough to come in and relieve a bottleneck or problem to get over there. If you've got, 16 people working there, and I'm still not clear how the staffing is going to be, the overall staffing is going to be, or they're just going to be the 8 valets on one floor and the 8 valets maybe on another floor, or, when you have special events, are all special events going to be parked on those particular levels, or are you going to let them try and fill up the open spaces first? All of this I'm trying to understand, and I don't have a clear picture from Mr. Sokic's testimony, because there are some generalities that he's put in there that, don't answer the specifics. So that's why I'm asking the questions and trying to, as I'm playing out scenarios in my mind, I'm not able to play them out all the way because I don't have enough information.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I can try and get Mr. Sokic to answer some of those, and obviously he just heard a number of those. But Mr. Sokic, I guess starting at the base one, you indicated that for just the 4th and the 6th floor, the Montclair Acquisition Partners would be. Typically, you're envisioning it's going to be 8 valets, correct? But that would just be handling the 4th and 6th floor, correct?
Correct.
And then
for both floors together.
Correct.
And you indicated there'd be additional valets that would be handling the 5th floor that the hotel would be utilizing, and those additional valets would be communicating with the other 8 valets you just referred to, correct?
As needed, correct.
And then
those would be the normal valets that are working for the hotel at that time, or would there be an increase in the hotel valets if there was a special event going on, since you control both?
Yeah, it would be a mix at the hotel where the regular staff would be on duty, but it would be supplemented by additional attendants from other locations to handle the extra volume of the event.
Or just the hotel, or are you talking about including the 8? Because I was singling out just the hotel. Were you going to up the hotel staff as opposed to the overall number?
So yes, the hotel would have additional staff.
So, Mr. Sokic, if you can approximate, forget about the 8 valets that are operating the 6th and the 4th floor. How many approximate hotel valets with the additional valets that would be on site for a special event? How many? What do you envision that approximate number is
for the hotel?
Yeah, on a special event day.
It depends on the size. I mean, look, it could be
worst case scenario.
For worst case scenario. And you could take a minute to run the math if you need to.
Look, it could be as many as 25 valets for the hotel.
So that'd be 25 plus 8, correct?
Correct.
So, all right, so, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if
That's a very cavalier answer. Yeah, I'm going to bring in 25 people for the hotel alone and pay them. I don't believe that. I'll tell you flat
It's,
out. I don't believe that.
I think we had for the grand opening over 25. We may have even had 30.
That was for everything, right?
No, that was for the
just for
grand
coach-
opening. That was for the grand opening.
But that was all the valets that you had on site, right?
I'm not sure what
You didn't have 25 plus another 8, plus. Forget it. Like I said, I find it hard to swallow. And so I guess the issue that I'm still having is, despite the additional testimony, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of guesswork in how this actual operation plays out at the hotel, worst case scenario. If there is a need, and let's say, hypothetically, if Mr. Giosa's estimations, which is all we have to work with right now, that for special events on weekends, we might having to park 560 to 687 cars. You're going to use a figure of approximately 1 valet per 50 cars still. Is that correct? That's what you would start out with, right?
For valet that originates in the garage, yes.
Right, for valet parking for the special event that would originate in the garage, because the valet parking for the hotel would originate at the hotel, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you feel that that's sufficient, that's enough to cover being able to get, if you've got cars, and at that figure, at that 560 figure, we're going to have, I would estimate, and I would think that we would have a number of those 6 and 7 deep stacked car aisles. We'd have quite a number of them present. They wouldn't be all full, perhaps at the 560 at the lower rate, but certainly, if we started hitting the towards the high, they'd be close to having every one of those slots on this parking plan filled. And at that point, then that should be enough staffing to get in and out, to get the special event cars in and out. That's your testimony.
Yes, it is.
Okay. I have to think about your testimony a bit more, Mr. Sokich. And I don't want to, like I said, it was a bit confusing. I got to digest it some. I don't have any more questions right now. But as I think about it, I may have questions later. Are there any other members of the board that have
Yes, I
questions?
had a question, and it goes back to the issue of the customer who was driving their own car. And now that I find that the customer who's driving their own car must drive that car up to the valet parking. My behavior, and I presume most customers, is if you have to drive through so many levels of the deck and you should see a parking space on level 2, I don't care where you're going, you're going to say whoopee and take level 2. And that you're not going to drive all the way through all vacant spaces in order to get to the top, where you've had the experience perhaps of having gone through that queue of cars parked so many deep in the chaos that entails. So that I would suspect that by the time you get to those who are going to the 4th and the 6th level, those are a mixture of people who didn't find parking because people who were on their way to the special event took them on the way up to the 6th floor. So I don't know that you're really dealing with a segregated group of people on the 4th and 6th floor, all who are coming at the same, going to the same event. So I suspect that it's much more complicated than the picture that is being described.
Look, I've been doing this a long time. It really is not that complicated. It's planned out. The 2nd and 3rd floor are reserved for residents, workers, and retail folks. There's going to be signs up basically stating 2nd floor reserved for that group, 3rd floor, the same thing. Somebody pulls into the garage, they could drive around the main floor. If there's a spot, they're more than welcome to park into it. More likely than not, those spots are going to go really fast, and then they'll follow the signs that tell them to proceed up to the roof.
Are you saying only the 1st floor is open to the ordinary person who's parking, and then after that, they've got to go up to the 4th or 6th floor?
Correct.
What about the Board of Ed and the retail spaces that would be available on the 2nd and 3rd?
If we had a comfort level that, let's say, you know, the 2nd floor fits 95 cars, and we noticed that, and we know from history that residents come home, you know, there's a little rush that takes place between 7 and 9. And we know that, you know, if we have 20 empty spots, that we probably need 10 of them for the residents. We may make an exception and allow some people to park on that floor, but it's not going to be haphazard. It's going to be controlled, where an attendant may say, okay, we'll take these 5 cars because we have extra inventory available tonight on the 2nd or 3rd floor. But that's going to be a managed situation. It's not going to be, you know, somebody deciding on their own to park on that level.
Any other questions from the board?
John, I have one question. This is Janice. Kristen, how do you distinguish between the hotel parking and the parking for a special event?
Can you drill down on that when you say, how do I distinguish? What do you mean exactly?
Well, you say the 5th floor is for hotel parking.
We don't control the 5th floor as a part of the Valley and Bloom operation. That's controlled by the hotel itself.
So if well, I guess my question is, somebody's coming to a special event at the hotel, wouldn't they pull up in front of the hotel and drop up?
We would hope so.
There?
Yeah,
And
we would
then
hope so.
So that, and then drop the car off there and then have it valet parked from the hotel rather than driving into the hotel and driving their car up. I thought the whole idea was if you're at a special
No,
event at
so
the hotel.
let me correct you on something or give you detail on something. Anybody that pulls up to the hotel gets valeted from the hotel. But some people, especially locals, on their own, don't go to the valet at the hotel. They just drive into the garage. So we don't know if they're going to the hotel. We don't know if they're going somewhere else. But more likely than not, a lot of them do go to the hotel. But we can't control their behavior. So if they go to the valet at the hotel, we valet their car. If they don't, they come to the garage on their own, we park their car accordingly.
Why wouldn't you check? Why wouldn't you tell your people who you're controlling, who work for the hotel, to check when somebody pulls up and ask them, are you here for the XYZ corporate event? Or are you here for the wedding? Or are you here for whatever? And then direct them into the parking as opposed to just saying, okay, we'll just park you.
I don't know.
Why wouldn't
Tom
you do
could
that?
answer this, but I think the hotel is required to valet those cars.
What makes you think that?
Because of the nature of their agreement to sublease the 5th floor. I thought it was a requirement that they had to valet the cars to the 5th floor.
I'm asking, but my question is, why wouldn't you tell your attendants to ask? You're supposed to be controlling the parking.
So we
And
control the parking.
we're relying on your organization to organize and manage the parking. So if somebody pulled up on a special event night, why wouldn't you ask the simple question, are you here for this event? As opposed to just parking the car with no questions.
Are you asking me that from the hotel valet pickup and drop off or from inside the garage?
I'm asking you from the hotel valet pickup.
So what you just
Pull up into the
described,
Port Corsair, you've never been here before, you don't know any better.
So
So it's like,
what-
oh, it's at the hotel, I pull in here.
so what you just described is exactly what happens. When a car pulls up, the valet asks them, are you staying at the hotel? Are you here for an event? Are you having dinner? That person will then say, I'm having dinner. It's the same, we'll know if they're going to the restaurant, we'll know if they're going to the event, or if they're checking into a room. But that happens at the hotel every day.
Okay. Because it sounded like from your answer, what you just answered to Janice, that question wasn't being asked.
Well, at the garage, we don't ask people where they're going. I mean, they could be going anywhere. We don't know. There's so many uses, different uses being utilized in that deck.
But on a special event day, wouldn't it make sense?
We could ask, maybe just for tracking purposes, but
And also for management, just basic management person of managing the parking so that to make sure that, you have enough space for everybody according to this plan that you've laid out for each floor.
But if somebody says they're not going to the event and they show up on the sixth floor, we're not going to turn them away.
If they give you a wrong answer, if they lie to you, yes, of course, you can't account for that. But, that wasn't the question. The question is, why wouldn't you just ask, as a normal part of managing the parking flow?
We could ask. Nobody's ever asked for that information, but it's something we could do.
Any other members of the board have questions?
Well, no, I'm confused. If you're going to just drive into the parking deck and get a ticket, so who are you talking to? You're just getting your ticket, right? And you're going to try to park. Is that not correct?
You pull a ticket to gain access to the garage, and then if you're being valeted, and usually 99.9% of the time, that's the only ticket you ever get, and you self-park. And that, less than 1% chance that we're in a valet scenario, you're going to drive to the 4th floor, the 6th floor. You're going to just be issued a locator ticket, which just basically means that's the ticket you use to pick up your car when you come back. Because the spitter ticket it's not made for valet. It's just to gain in and out through the gates.
And Kristen, there would be signage for when people come into the garage on those days where you anticipate valet parking says, if you're here for the special event, please proceed to floor number 6. Is that
correct?
I seem to recall that how many of your people were there on the night of the grand opening, Mr. Sokich? Because I seem to recall Councilor Schlager saying that she waited an hour and a half to get her car out. What happened that particular night?
Not enough people.
I don't know if you were on the last meeting's call, but so
I'm the attorney for the board. I'm on every call.
Okay, so let me go through it then. We didn't have use of about a third of the vehicle inventory in the garage. The lift and slide was out of commission. Half of the main floor had supplies and materials from the lift and slide, so we lost half the main floor. And the second floor was in the process of getting a new membrane, so we didn't have use of the second floor. So effectively, we only had about 2/3 of the normal capacity of the garage to park in. That was one. The other issue was we were parking cars. We were told we could park cars in the Ferrara lot, and because of the distance between Ferrara and the hotel being right next door to each other, that made a lot of sense. So we parked about 90 cars on that lot. Halfway through the event, one of the police chiefs or sergeants came over and said, you got to remove all these cars. So in the middle of the event, by the police stating that, it created a bit of a chaotic situation where we had to repark a whole bunch of cars back into the deck. And it just created some wait times, that's basically what it came down to.
Any other questions from the board?
My one question was, if Mr. Sokich, your firm doesn't both park for the hotel and provide parking services for the current applicant, how will you manage, say you're only working for one entity, how will you manage with another parking company to pull off, special event parking?
Well, we would do it. I mean, we'd communicate with the hotel management itself. They would give us a schedule of events. We would know what events are taking place each week. Whatever company they decided to use for their valet would valet the cars, like pull into the porte cochere, and we would be prepared for the overflow based on their event schedule.
But you wouldn't have the aid of the walkie-talkie system or, as much ramp control? Would that be
Normally, anytime you're dealing with hotels, because they're extremely customer service orientated, they would like to get you integrated as much as possible. So we would probably go to their pre-event meetings. We would have a walkie-talkie that ties into the hotel walkie-talkie system and their vendor. There would be a lot of communication going on.
Okay.
Other questions from the board? All right, let's open it up to our public. Are there any questions from members of the public who are virtually in attendance?
Martin, I've unmuted you, so if you have any questions, now's the time to ask them.
I do, but I'm not clear which witness to ask them to. Is there another witness who will discuss the building itself, or are we just talking about parking spaces?
I think we're just talking about parking spaces with this witness. He's with the parking management company, and it's
Right.
the parking spaces and how they plan to accommodate or park the required number of spaces.
Yes, I no, that's what I'm saying. I've heard the testimony. He doesn't seem like the appropriate witness to ask these questions. Perhaps Mr. Troutner could advise, is there somebody talking about the building itself that is going to be presented as a witness? Or I would ask these questions of Mr. Troutner directly at some appropriate point. But I don't think this witness is the correct person to address my particular questions and testimony for.
Okay. Mr. Troutner, who else are you presenting this evening? Or would like to present?
So
Be muted.
further this evening, we have James Miller, our professional planner. I think, as I recall, Mr. Schwartz may have had a question at a prior meeting, which I thought would be addressed to a planner. So I don't know if that's the follow-up question, but those are the two witnesses we have this evening.
Yes, it sounds like,
go ahead.
It sounds like the planner is a more appropriate witness to ask these questions to, either the planner or directly to Mr. Troutner for his client. So I think I should hold. Let's hear what the planner has to say, and then I'll ask appropriate questions.
All right. Anyone else wish to be heard?
I think that's it for the public.
All right. Okay. I think now might be a good time to take a break before we jump into your next witness, Mr. Troutner.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman.
So we'll do a 5-minute break, and we'll see you back shortly.
Thank you.
We can tune back in.
Okay.
And are we back on the record, Janice?
We are back on the record.
Okay. Hey, Mr. Troutman?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our next witness is James Miller, professional planner. So with the Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to have Mr. Miller sworn in, and I'd seek to qualify him as an expert in the field of professional planning.
Mr. Miller, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I can.
Would you please, and I see you've already raised your right hand, do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Would you please state your full name and business affiliation for the record?
Yes, my full name is James A. Miller, and my professional affiliation is J. A. Miller Planning Consultants, Morristown, New Jersey.
Thank you.
And Mr. Miller, if you could you just provide the board a brief overview of your credentials, your education, licensing, whatnot?
Yes, I'm a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. I'm a certified planner by the American Institute of Certified Planners. I have a master's in city and regional planning from Rutgers University, and I've been practicing for well over 40 years at this point. I've been qualified as an expert witness by state and federal courts. I have extensive experience with zoning applications, and I've appeared as a planning expert and been qualified as an expert in over 250 municipalities in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Communities near Montclair where I've been qualified as an expert would include West Orange, East Orange, Verona, Englewood, Englewood Cliffs, Haworth, Hackensack, Park Ridge, Wyckoff by Bayonne, Elizabeth, Carteret, Edison, Highland Park, South Brunswick, North Brunswick, New Brunswick, Old Bridge, Sayreville, Roselle, Springfield, and others.
Mr. Chairman, if the board has any questions, certainly welcome, but we'd ask that Mr. Miller be qualified as an expert in the field of professional planning.
We'll accept them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Miller, can you just give the board a brief overview of, you're familiar with the subject of tonight's application?
Yes. I've been out to the site and walked the site in the surrounding area. I've reviewed the redevelopment plan. I've reviewed the site plans and the various parking plans, including the one that's been under discussion this evening. I've reviewed the prior resolutions and the planner's report, and basically that's how I've prepared for this evening's meeting.
Now, can you, I guess, give the board an overview of your planning analysis in terms of this application, particularly with respect to some of the prior discussion that went on about the encroachment of the existing facade into the right-of-way?
Yes. For the record, this is a property on Orange Road. It's across from the Hillside School. And the property is located in the Montclair Gateway Phase 1 redevelopment plan area. To the north is an auto body shop, which is eventually going to be redeveloped for a mixed-use building. And the MC Hotel and various other commercial buildings. To the east, you have mixed-use commercial buildings, a street-level parking lot. To the south, there's the Montclair Community Pre-K facility and some residential uses further to the south, including a garden apartment complex. And on the west, there's the Hillside Elementary School and a number of residential uses, primarily single-family detached. The existing use is the parking garage. The use that's being discussed this evening by the board is a permitted use, one that's supported and encouraged by the redevelopment plan. And the use that's viewed by the redevelopment plan as an important element of the redevelopment plan, as it's going to provide the parking needed for the other uses within the planned area. I've been asked tonight to provide testimony to justify allowing the existing facade to retain its previously granted land use approvals. From a planning standpoint, in other words, to explain the reasons why the applicant should not be required to demolish the existing facade or reconstruct that facade to eliminate the 8-inch relief that was granted by the prior resolution that affected this property. In terms of the background of the request, in 2012, the planning board granted approval for the expansion of the garage structure by extending the parking decks. The expansion yielded an increase in the basic parking capacity of the garage from 475 spaces to 523. And this capacity could be increased at that time to 686 spaces through operational measures involving valet parking. In 2013, the Township Council granted the applicant an easement to encroach 12 inches into the right-of-way along Orange Road because the facade construction, because the structure as previously built encroached 4 inches into the right-of-way, and because the facade construction to accommodate an automated parking mechanism called a lift and slide required an additional 8 inches into the right-of-way. At that time, an easement agreement was entered into to permit the building, and building permits were issued. In 2014, the lift and slide mechanism was approved and projected to have a capacity of 116 spaces. The lift and slide would occupy an area that would have provided approximately 50 spaces, and the net gain would have been around 66 spaces. The lift and slide was never fully installed or operational, and has never produced any additional parking capacity. And the attempt to install the lift and slide resulted in a temporary reduction of the parking capacity of the garage. And this, of course, was discussed earlier in the meeting with, basically, there's a lot of construction materials and equipment that's stored on the first level, which constricts and reduces the current capacity of the garage. In 2015 and 16, after numerous meetings between the applicant and the planning board's revision committee and the township's redevelopment architectural consultant, the applicant agreed to certain requests by the township architectural consultant, members of the revisions committee, to make changes to previously approved facade. The applicant was advised that the amended site plan approval was required because of some of these proposed changes to the facade. In 2016, the applicant applied for amended site plan approval, and after multiple meetings between the applicant and the board's revision committee and the HPC, the development review committee and the planning board and the board approved a redesign of the facade in 2017. So over the course of that year, the board finally approved the current design. And in order to construct the design supported by the board, an additional encroachment of 8 inches in the right-of-way was required. This resulted in a total encroachment of 20 inches in the right-of-way. Again, the deck was initially constructed before the applicant owned it, and it already had a 4-inch encroachment into the right-of-way. The board granted the additional encroachment, and the building permits were issued for the construction of the redesigned facade, and the construction was commenced. During the construction, it came to the applicant's attention, through no fault of the applicant, that the utilization of the lift and slide mechanism would not be feasible. The applicant provided testimony attesting to this at the January hearing, which I did not attend, but then I did view the tape of that hearing. As a result, the applicant filed this application for minor site plan approval to allow the lift and slide to be removed from the garage on a permanent basis, and to allow the floor plate of the levels to be extended to maximize the parking capacity of the garage. This structure has been subject to 2 front yard variances. The redevelopment plan requires a 0 setback for the structure. The structure received the 2 front yard variances, which have resulted in the structure being lawfully constructed to encroach a total of 20 inches into the Orange Road right-of-way. The 2021 parking plan found that the capacity increased to 574 spaces due to the hotel's valet system in place at level 5. You've already again heard all the statistics related to the parking. More aggressive use of valet parking allows the capacity to be as great as 692 spaces, which is 6 more than the 686 projected in the 2012 approval. The authors of the March 8th, 2021 report concluded that, first, the deck had the capacity to accommodate all the parking demands of all the various groups. Second, although the valet plan provides for a capacity of 692 spaces, quote, based on historic data, the likelihood of valet is slight. Third, the current demand based on counts compiled by the operator is between 220 and 320 spaces, so well below under typical conditions, the capacity of the garage. So in summary, the capacity of the garage is 574 spaces with the valet system on level 5 and self-parking on the remaining levels. The capacity is more than adequate to meet the current demands as testified to by the parking report and the expert who presented the parking report. In terms of the variance relief, the standards of review for the deviation for the bulk standards are in the redevelopment plan. The redevelopment plan provides a process for granting the deviations, and the provisions in the redevelopment plan mirror the procedures in the municipal land use law for C bulk variances. And this is consistent with the case law, Whedon v. City Council of the City of Trenton, and Milford Mill 128 LLC versus the Borough of Milford. Both found that it's appropriate way for reviewing deviations from redevelopment plans is to apply the procedures in the MLUL for bulk variance relief. The courts also concluded that a redevelopment plan serves as an overlay zone and should be subject to procedures applicable to zoning districts. Montclair's plan is consistent with these rules and has incorporated the bulk variance procedures of the MLUL into the redevelopment plan. The plan provides two means of satisfying the positive criteria for a bulk variance. First, hardship, and I quote, by reason of exceptional narrowness, shallowness, or shape of a specific property, or by reason of exceptional topographic conditions or physical features uniquely affecting a specific piece of property, the strict application of any bulk regulation adopted pursuant to this redevelopment plan would result in peculiar difficulties to or exceptional and undue hardship upon the developer, end of quote. And the second means would be the balancing test. And again, I'm quoting from the plan, where the purposes of the redevelopment plan would be advanced by a deviation from the strict requirements of this plan, and the benefits of the deviation would outweigh any detriments. And that's basically the flexible C criteria or inversion of the flexible C criteria that is established by the municipal land use law. The plan also requires satisfaction of the negative criteria and applies a two-step process similar to the MLUL. The first step is no substantial detriment to the public welfare, which is exactly the requirement in the MLUL. And then secondly, no substantial impairment of the intent or purpose of the redevelopment plan. And the power to grant these deviations is vested in the planning board. So with that, the first thing I would like to do is review apply the balancing criteria, which were applied in the initial variance back in 2017. And then following my review of those criteria, and I'm going to conclude that the variance continues to meet those criteria, I'm also going to show that the variance would be, the continuation of the variance would also be justified by the hardship criteria as well. So I'll begin with the balancing criteria. And those, again, are established by showing that the variance provides a means to advance the purposes of the redevelopment plan and where the benefits of the relief would outweigh any detriments. And the purposes of the redevelopment plan that are advanced are basically listed on page 8 of the redevelopment plan. And they've already been fulfilled by the existing parking garage to some extent, and they include, it is part of a coordinated redevelopment effort. It supports surrounding redevelopment by providing parking for the residents of Valley and Bloom, office uses, retail employees, Board of Education administrators, the MC Hotel, and the general public. It is also a land use that supports and enhances business activity. It works to ensure that land use mix is compatible with the parking supply. And finally, it represents an ongoing effort to, quote, maximize the potential of the Orange Road parking deck to provide parking for the project. So it continues to advance all those goals of the redevelopment plan. The finding in the resolution granting the 2017 relief for the facade and additional encroachments included for the design of the structure also advanced the design objectives of the plan. And in that resolution, the findings include the following, and I quote again, the inclusion of the proposed architectural elements was to visibly reduce the facade massing and make it a more attractive building plan than the original concrete cast structure that had been approved. And end of quote, and a second quote, harmonize the structure with the Montclair Center as required by the plan, end of quote. This conclusion was based in part on revisions made during the board's review, including the township's redevelopment architect, the board's development review committee, the board's revisions committee, and the historical preservation committee's recommendations as they pertain to the design of the facade, the landscaping, and the lighting. The previously approved design of the facade will be retained and continued, and the parking capacity will be maximized to the extent it can be given the constraints of the existing structure. Regarding the balancing test criteria, the board found, and I quote again, there will be adequate distance between the facade and the sidewalk, end of quote, and that, quote, in short, the parking is to be being maximized without any detriment to the public caused by this de minimis change. Both those quotes are from page 6 of the resolution. In other words, the board found that the setback variances satisfied the balancing test and the positive criteria. And quote, that its requested deviations in the use variance will outweigh any detriments and can be granted without impairment to the intent and purposes of the plan. It's my opinion that this remains the case and the benefits still outweigh the detriments. These benefits include the facade appearance will be enhanced in accordance with the board's previous approval. That plan remains in place and will be implemented. The sidewalk and the landscaping improvements will be completed. The redevelopment plan requires a 4-foot sidewalk and specifies that 4 foot is the width required for safety. The 4-foot sidewalk is in place. I've been out there, I've seen it in the field, and it meets all the specifications of the plan. The removal of the lift and slide mechanism can be completed and the garage restored to full capacity. Once the site plan that's before the board is approved, that'll enable all that construction work to take place and restore this garage to its design capacity, which currently it can't attain. It will allow the implementation of the measures needed to maximize the capacity of the garage as recommended by the redevelopment plan through both structural and operational means. That's been the subject of the testimony earlier this evening and the current parking plan. All that is geared towards optimizing the parking capacity of the structure and doing so either by structural or operational means. The structural means being the extension of the floor pads, and then the operational means again were presented this evening by Mr. Sokich. Another benefit will be that it will minimize the disruption of Orange Road corridor that would be created by more extensive renovations. This point also came up in the prior hearing. Basically, if there was more extensive renovations, it would require more extensive equipment. That in turn would require more disruption to the traffic flow and parking on Orange Road. And this disruption would occur over a greater span of time, and it would prolong the closure of the sidewalk and the need and call for the need of more intrusive construction machinery and related impacts that again were detailed earlier in the hearing process. All those benefits are significant. The impacts of the deviation remain de minimis, as the board found back in 2017. The setback deviation will remain de minimis and inconsequential, and to demonstrate that, we've prepared the plan that's in front of the board currently. And what this plan is an as-built of the conditions that are currently existing in the field. And there's a series of 4 insets Inset A shows the encroachment is only 4 inches on the southern corner of the structure, and that would be the corner to the left of inset A. Inset B shows that the encroachment is 8 inches to accommodate the column on the southern side of the driveway at the center of the building, and that is much less to the side of the column. Excuse me a second, I misspoke here. Basically, the inset B shows that the encroachment, the 8-inch encroachment, is limited to this column, which occupies about 3 feet of that particular segment of the facade. I also want to note that the facade is not exactly parallel to Orange Road, and for the portion of the wall extending between insets A and B, which is a distance of approximately 69 feet, the width of the encroachment shrinks from 4 inches to 1 inch as the distance between the road and the building increase. Inset C shows that the encroachment on the other side of the driveway open to accommodate an additional column on the north side of the driveway. It's 7 inches. And again, that's an encroachment that's located within the center of the building where the access drive comes in from Orange Road. For the remaining portion of the facade extending between insets B and D, a distance of approximately 117 feet, the width of the encroachment depicted in inset D is not extended to the 8-inch encroachment at all. In other words, it meets the requirements before the 8-inch variance was granted, with the exception of a 3-foot portion containing the 3-foot column shown in inset C. So to sum up, the encroachment areas are as follows: a 69-foot segment equal to about 36.5% of the wall's length, where the encroachment declines from 4 inches to 1 inch. Secondly, a 3-foot wide column, which represents 1.5% of the facade length, where the encroachment equals 8 inches. So there's only a 3-foot segment of this facade where the maximum amount of encroachment occurs, the 8-inch encroachment. A 3-foot wide column, which represents again 1.5% of the facade length, where the encroachment equals 7 inches. And then the remaining 114 feet of the wall segment, or 60% of the facade's length, does not extend beyond the existing easement line or the 8-inch extension granted in 2017. So, in summary, an encroachment of this scope and scale will not be visually discernible, and it will have no impact on safety or the utility of the sidewalk and the adjoining road. It's the very epitome of what you mean by de minimis. So when you apply the balancing test to the exterior conditions that supported the prior approval, they remain unchanged. The deviation remains de minimis, and the facade will comport with the plan's design policies. The sidewalk width will remain 4 feet wide, as required by the redevelopment plan. There will be adequate safety and will provide the benefits of the deviation will continue to far outweigh the very de minimis impacts of the deviation that I've just described in detail a few moments ago. So basically, the benefits of this deviation far outweigh any detriments. It satisfies the balancing test under the standards of the redevelopment plan. It advances the policies of the redevelopment plan as required and meets all the applicable criteria under the positive criteria. The requested relief will not result in a substantial detriment to the public welfare, and it will not substantially impair the intent or purpose of the redevelopment plan as well. The requested relief during the 2017 hearing, the board found that, quote, the deviation from the plan will cause no substantial detriment to the public good or the plan itself. And I believe this continues to be the case because really nothing's changed in terms of the physical alignment of the wall since the 2017 resolution was adopted. And the board found that the setback variance satisfied the negative criteria, and this remains true as well. The design that supported the conclusion has not been altered. It continues to advance the public welfare by contributing to the implementation of the redevelopment plan and achieves the attendant benefits to the redevelopment plan and the township as a whole. The use remains consistent with the objectives of the redevelopment plan that I cited earlier, and the parking plan in place is flexible and maximizes the parking capacity of the garage and is consistent with the redevelopment plan. So therefore, the requested relief advances and does not impair the intent or purpose of the redevelopment plan and satisfies the negative criteria that has been established by the plan as well. So in every respect, the relief granted in 2017 continues to meet the balancing test and the standards and merits the validation of the board and the extension of the 2017 variance by this board under the balancing criteria established by your redevelopment plan. In addition, I believe that the relief also satisfies the hardship criteria of the redevelopment plan, and I'm going to show how that applies as well. Again, the hardship criteria established by showing that due to exceptional conditions, the strict enforcement of the redevelopment plan zoning regulations would result in peculiar or exceptional difficulties or an undue hardship. And in addition to meeting the balancing test, this relief also meets the hardship criteria. The modification of the building facade that occurred in conjunction with the efforts to install the lift and slide have resulted in physical features uniquely affecting a specific piece of property. The strict application of any building bulk regulations adopted pursuant to this redevelopment plan result in a peculiar difficulties to or exceptional and undue hardship upon the developer. The building facade foundations and the structural components of the wall were constructed in conjunction with the approvals granted by this board. The inability of the applicant to operate the lift and slide system is through no fault of the operator. It's a fault of the design of the lift and slide. And the peculiar difficulties and exceptional and undue hardship are a product of the existing physical features of the property. This conclusion is supported in the case law as well. There's a case, Hallery Lloyd versus Board of Adjustment, which found that the hardship criteria of the municipal land use law applied to the use of an existing foundation that required relief from a setback standard. And this case only dealt with a foundation. Here we're dealing not only with the foundation, but an existing 5-story, 6-story wall, which is already in place. So it not only meets but exceeds the situation in the applicable case. And the court found that the expense of relocating the foundation was found to be a hardship within the meaning of the statute. And here the resources and expenses which would be incurred if the relief for the 8-foot or 8-inch setback variance were withdrawn would constitute peculiar difficulties and an undue hardship that would satisfy the positive criteria for this form of relief. The components of this hardship would include the need to remove the entire facade, which has been deemed to meet the applicable criteria under the plan for its construction, forcing the developer to remove a lawfully constructed 5-story facade that meets any definition, and that, in my mind, meets any definition of a peculiar difficulty and an exceptional and an undue hardship, given the magnitude of the work that would be involved in that effort. And again, you've heard testimony about what that would involve. The construction of the facade has already cost $5.4 million. If the board was to rescind the previously granted encroachment, the deviation required the applicant to reconstruct the facade and move it back the 8 inches. It would require the expenditure of an additional $1 million for a total of $6.4 million. So that quantifies the undue and exceptional hardship that would result if for some reason the applicant had to deconstruct the wall and move the facade back to just the 8 inches. And basically the 8 inches again only occurs where that one column is. There's another 7-inch deviation. The balance of the deviations are less than 4 inches, and most of the wall complies with the current encroachment line. So it's my opinion these factors combine to constitute peculiar difficulties and exceptional and undue hardship required to satisfy the positive criteria, and they justify the continuation of the 8-inch setback relief that was granted in 2017. This relief will also satisfy the negative criteria for the requested relief. There will be no substantial detriment. As I testified earlier, the sidewalk retains its width and location, which has been deemed to be compliant with the plan. And again, there will be adequate distance between the facade and the sidewalk. And that's the finding that the board reached in 2017. The board already found that the facade is designed to consistent with the design objectives of the plan. There's no contemplating, there's no proposal to alter that design in any respect. So there will be no impairment in the intent or purpose of the plan. As shown earlier, the existing garage structure meets many of the policy objectives of the plan. It also remains a fully permitted use. The parking study shows that the parking capacity will be maximized to the greatest extent possible within the constraints created by the existing building. And the impact of the 8-inch deviation has been determined to be de minimis by prior approvals granted by the board, a finding fully supported by field conditions in which confirm the adequacy of the sidewalk and the overall consistency of the proposed improvements with the redevelopment plan. So in summary, it's my opinion that deviation granted allowing the initial 8-inch encroachment into the right-of-way in 2017 was validly granted because it met the deviation balancing criteria and the standards of the redevelopment plan, and it furthered the purpose and intent of the redevelopment plan as set forth in that resolution. It is also my opinion that inasmuch as the board's approval and the encroachment deviation is valid, the deviation remains valid and is not and should not be extinguished just because the lift and slide has been eliminated. So basically, I believe that the board acted rightly in 2017. The conditions and criteria that applied in 2017 remain in effect. There's additional benefits, I believe, that were not cited in 2017 that can be cited at this point in time. And that also the relief would meet the hardship criteria. And for all those reasons, I believe it satisfies all the applicable criteria and that the retention of this relief should be approved by the board.
So, Mr. Miller, just to, so at the risk of double summing up, you mentioned the C2 and C1 and C2 criteria previously. It's your, in your opinion, the C1 and C2 criteria continue to be met, and that were the basis for the granting of the variance back in 2017. It's good. It was good then, and it's still good now. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I don't have any more questions, but certainly, I'm sure the board may.
Any questions from the board? Doesn't appear that there are any questions from the board. What about the public?
Okay, go ahead, Martin.
Yes, Mr. Miller. Is it your testimony that your client or the prior owner has asked the township 2 or 3 times and received plan amendments accordingly to push this parking deck out into the public right-of-way because the client needed additional space to operate the lift and slide system in order to provide the public spaces promised, yet they are now asking to remove that very system from the parking deck, but to still keep the deck within our public space and keep the various reliefs provided from amendments, now with an even further encroachment found. Was that your testimony, sir?
Yes, it was.
Mr. Miller, isn't it true that you just wrongly testified that the reason for the last request for a prior push out into the public right-of-way in 2016-17 was to accommodate the facade details sought by the board then? However, the request for that, again, additional extension into the public right-of-way and now encroachment found again was really to still further accommodate the needs of the now being removed lift and slide system, not the board's facade approval sought, and the board believing then that this relief was again needed for the lift and slide system being proposed. Isn't that the case?
My understanding is that
Jim, hold on a second. I'm not sure he can actually answer the question in terms of.
That was really for you, Mr. Troutner.
Yeah. So Look, my recollection was, and I think this is the fact, is that the encroachment into the right of way was triggered by the design. I know Mr. Miller testified that, and I think the underlying record supports that. So I think his testimony is accurate. So I think I disagree with the premise of the question.
Well, as I was on the board at the time and sat on the Development Review Committee, I can tell you that that testimony was false. The reason for the additional relief sought then was because of the additional needs to operate the lift and slide system. And I ask this because effectively the client, your client, had already built the structural steel portion of the expanded facade into our public space before getting board approval for what the final detailing of the deck would look like and what structural elements may have been needed to potentially support precast concrete needed for approval, which most of the older deck is made of. But let me continue with my questioning.
I respectfully disagree with that, but go ahead.
Isn't it true that the strength of the steel supports originally put into this then unapproved front deck facade was done to accommodate only a lift and slide system, but from prior testimony given before the board's Development Review Committee, your client advised the board that it could not support more attractive precast concrete as the deck's exterior facade, which the board wanted, because the structural steel was already installed prematurely for only the lift system. Yet the project did not still have final approval then, or the client did not know what the board wanted for any exterior detailing. Isn't that the case, Mr. Troutner?
No, that's not true. There was a facade approved in 2012, and the revisions committee, the township's redevelopment architectural consultant, then requested that the applicant consider further amendments to the facade, which triggered the 2017 approval.
With that in mind, sir, isn't it true that your client or the prior owner submitted plans to the board during the 2016-17 review in such a manner as to intentionally confuse both the reviewing board members and to intentionally confuse the board's reviewing redevelopment architect by placing the plans, writing the plans in such a way that both individuals and reviewers believe that precast concrete was being used as the body facade, but instead you were really proposing to use a less attractive EIFS system than on the front facade body. Isn't that the case, sir?
No, I disagree with that. The plans that were submitted and the discussions that took place in the 2016-2017 hearing process consistently referred to stucco to match existing precast. There was no reference or misrepresentation or misleading of the material.
Very good, sir. Isn't it true that even now, when you still don't have final approval for this deck, given the amended changes being proposed today for the removal of the lift and slide system, that workers were still operating on the exterior steel structure as recently as 2 weeks ago, welding plates onto the front facade?
It's possible people were working 2 weeks ago. There are active building permits that allow people to work on the site, and there is an approved facade from 2017. And this application doesn't seek to alter the approved facade.
Sir, isn't it true that your client could still operate this deck by either pulling the front facade back out of the public right of way if the prior reliefs were then removed, the amendments, because you're no longer providing the lift and slide system which was promised, or you could add more structural steel if needed that would accommodate a precast concrete facade so that the building looks more like the deck looks more like a building as is called for in the redevelopment plan, but that you're refusing to still do this simply because of added cost.
Well, there were more. I'll let Mr. Miller speak to the reason. I believe it's already been testified to. There's the cost component as well as the other complications, the public safety and prolonging construction in the field, as well as additional equipment, which bode towards, I believe, why the applicant would prefer not to be in a position to have to move the building back 8 inches. As for the remainder of your question, again, we're not seeking to amend the facade, so there's been no testimony or discussion regarding the need to amend the facade. And I think inherent was your question was a suggestion that the planning board approved a facade which is not compliant with the redevelopment plan, which we would respectfully disagree with.
So if you're not required to push the entire building back out of the public space and lose the various amendments provided for the lift and slide system, which is not being provided today at all, don't you feel you should compensate Montclair in some way for these previously broken promises and the use of the public space today by adding back better precast concrete detailing to create a better building?
I guess you and I might respectfully agree to disagree about whether or not the building needs to be made better in terms of the approved facade design. No, I don't think there's a requirement to financially compensate in conjunction with the minor site plan application that we've brought in conjunction with this, either under law or municipal land use or ordinance or otherwise.
So just to clarify, you obtained approvals and relief pushing out 3 times into the public right of way, ostensibly to install a lift and slide system that is now not being installed. You put steel structure up prior to an approval, then claimed you couldn't put in better precast concrete dealing because you had to only support a lift and slide system that is now not being provided. And yet today you still can't provide better precast concrete and don't want to spend the money, but yet want relief from having to pull the entire structure back. And you still don't feel that you should compensate Montclair in any way for the 3 amended times of relief that you've been granted. Those are my questions today, sir. Thank you.
I respectfully disagree with the many things that were just said in that if that was a question, a multi-part question. I guess the one thing I guess I should respond to is our application doesn't currently seek any relief related to the 8-inch encroachment. This entire line of testimony from Mr. Miller arose out of the suggestion that the board contemplated or is contemplating the possible rescission of a variance that was previously granted, which actually we don't even concede is legal, but we would say is not necessary based on Mr. Miller's testimony.
Well, you raise a good point, sir. Since the variances well, they're not variances, since the relief of the plan provided before was based on testimony that it was there for the lift and slide system, which is now not being provided, wouldn't the board have the option of reversing all prior amendments and relief provided in the past, since the basis for that relief is no longer there? And therefore, you'd be required to push the building not back 8 inches or 1 inch, but back to where it was prior to any space amendments for the front facade. Wouldn't the board be within its right to require that of you?
No, and I disagree with. So one, there was an easement granted, as was previously covered, for 8 inches into the right of way. And then in 2017, there was a variance granted for an additional 8 inches. So there's really only, I think, one request that's at issue. And we've already covered, and I respectfully disagree that that request was solely linked to the lift and slide. It was related to, and I think the underlying record confirms this, it was related to the facade, proposed facade amendments that various groups were seeking.
Well, if the board disagreed with you on that and found, hypothetically, that all the amendments provided for push out into the public right of way from the very beginning were based solely on the lift and slide system not being provided, wouldn't the board or council in its prerogative have the right to reverse those various the relief supplied and you would be required to go back even further than the relief being sought today?
No, because there's no basis under law for the board to rescind a previously lawfully granted variance for which rights have vested. And there's no conditions in this case that would justify that. To the extent that any such conditions exist, potentially fraud or mistake, but that's certainly not the case here.
Wasn't it based on false testimony that there would be a lift and slide system provided, and now it's not there?
That's not false testimony. There was prior testimony about a lift and slide system that's been extensively covered. The reason why the lift and slide system is not being installed or would propose not to be installed at this time.
No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
All right. We don't have any other members of the public, do we, Janice?
There's one other member, Alex Zukowski. Do you have any questions for Mr. Miller?
I do not.
Okay.
I have one question. So I drove by the site today and there is a huge crane that's operating. I'm just wondering, what is it doing?
Mr. Miller's probably not the right witness for this, but Mr. Casillo, or if you're on, I don't know if you could answer a board member question.
The crane is there. They're continuing to bring some supplemental steel.
Mr. Casillo, Mr. Casillo, just hang on a second. I just want to make sure that you understand you remain under oath, right?
Yes. Yes, sir.
I apologize for interrupting.
I apologize. I jumped the gun on the response. So the crane that was, and I haven't spoken to them today, the crane that was there most likely is bringing supplemental framing for the cornice, which is one of the exterior elements at the top of the facade. So chances are they were bringing some, supplemental light gauge framing and things of that nature. There's also the infill panel work that's on the north and south faces of the garage, which was another board-approved element. There's some steel needed for that as well.
I'm just asking because we just heard a question that seemed to imply that the applicant jumped the gun previously without doing something with board approval. So.
And we respectfully disagree with that allegation.
I have a question for Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, you alluded to 3, possibly 4 cases during the course of your testimony. Would it be possible for you to send me the names of those cases and their citations?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, if we don't have any further questions from the board or its professionals, then Mr. Troutner, we can move on to the next phase of your presentation.
So
the witness.
So we actually don't have any further witnesses, Mr. Chairman. I did want to respond to I think there's at least one unresolved comment in Mr. Giosa's March 17th review letter, and it relates to the submitting of reports if this application is approved regarding parking. Mr. Giosa, I believe, suggested that a biennial report should be submitted summarizing parking demand, occupancy level, and operations. And because of parking demand development lag, I guess, related to COVID-19 pandemic, that those biennial reports be submitted for at least 10 years following the completion of the horizontal deck expansion. We don't want to argue extensively about submitting reports because we're fine with doing that. We were going to suggest that perhaps it makes sense to submit the reports for biannually for 3 years and then convert to an annual report obligation, maybe for an additional 3 years. But obviously we'd be open to suggestions in terms of how the board feels about that. But I didn't want to leave that completely unresolved. Mr. Gios also had a comment about the 48 township spaces and the self-park. That's previously been testified to in conjunction with the parking license agreement. I want to rehash that testimony, but just to mention that that's our, I guess, response to that particular comment.
I'm sorry, what is your response to that comment? I mean,
That we're complying with the parking license agreement.
That therefore there will be 48 spaces available to the public. Okay.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I left one thing out. There was a request that the applicant commit that the applicant will not close or refuse access to the parking garage unless it's operating in a full valet mode. We agree we won't close or refuse access to the garage.
All right. Personally, I'm not prepared to really make a decision this evening on this application because I need to review some of tonight's testimony and go back and check the record on a few things that were raised, a few issues that were raised. So I will offer you, Mr. Troutner, the option. If you want to go and sum up this evening, and we can open up to questions, we can do that. Or if you want to do that at a following meeting after we've had time to look at the evidence some of the evidence that's been presented this evening.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom, forgive me.
Okay.
I know that question was directed at you. If I could just say that I would also appreciate an opportunity to review some of the legal points that Mr. Miller has raised with regard to the rescission question of variances, in addition to the cases that he raised. So, Tom, I didn't mean to jump on you, but I'd appreciate the opportunity to be able to research a little bit more into these issues because I think they're highly complex.
I have a question in addition. Is it possible, I mean, clearly Mr. Miller was reading something. Is it possible to get that document so that we don't have to relook at the tape again?
When you say reading something, he was quoting from previous board approval. Is that what you're
No,
referring
it
to?
struck me that when he was talking, he was actually reading something, and
Where he was quoting the language?
No, his whole testimony was read.
Yeah, I don't think he has to. I don't think the witness has to provide that, Mr. Troutner. His testimony stands, Mr. Troutner. If you wish to have your witness provide something in writing, that's your option. But I don't think that we can require them to do that.
No, I understand that. I'm just hoping that he might just save us the trouble of relooking at this tape. If we could just, have his written testimony as he seems to have been reading from this document.
I'm sorry, I'm babbling. I'll have to confer with him and my client. I suspect he was probably looking at notes, which probably are not in a shape to just simply hand over. So I guess we'll discuss that and I guess get back to you. But I appreciate I appreciate the nature of your request in terms of trying to streamline what you guys are looking at. And Mr. Chairman, respectfully, if you could just give me a moment, if we could take 2 minutes, just so I can confer with my client on the question of, I think, adjourning now and then having me sum up at the next meeting, versus trying to plow forward at this point, because your point was well taken in terms of what you would appreciate in terms of some time to look at some things, and I just want to confer with them to make sure they're not going to be angry with me however I answer.
Of course.
Tom, would it be all right if I respond to to Ms. Lockman's question?
Sure.
Yeah. Just to answer your question on my presentation, I did read extensively from quotes from the, basically quotes and notes that I made on the redevelopment plan and some other elements. But I also, as dry as it might have been, I was ad-libbing quite a bit as well, but I did work from notes. But the notes would not be an exact replica of my testimony by any means.
That's
And
fine. I just
so
thought,
I don't know how definitive it would be to whether it would help you that much.
no, that's fine. Thank you.
It's
Nice
apologize
job.
if my delivery seemed like I was reading, but I was relying on notes, but not necessarily a recitation of those notes.
Nice job ad-libbing there, Mr. Miller.
Thank you.
Right, well, Mr. Troutner, go ahead, take whatever time you need.
Great,
and
thank you.
We will stand by.
And I'm back.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, after confirming my client, I think we will respectfully hold our closing until the next meeting, and I guess can deal with whatever we need to at that time. Certainly, if the board has more questions, we'll be able to cross that bridge and then complete the application in an orderly manner.
All right, and I know I certainly will, as I am looking at stuff, if I feel that there are more questions, I will try and get the board secretary to communicate those questions to you so that you might be prepared, so that we can move forward efficiently. And then I would also, if other members of the board have questions or anticipate that there might be more questions that they would like answers to before making a decision, that they also communicate through Janice so that she can pass those questions along to you so that they can be discussed at the next meeting too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the next meeting would be April 12th. Does that work for you?
I think we're good.
Okay.
All right, and we've whatever extensions or anything that we need in order to carry it through without forfeiting anyone's rights. Are we good, Mr. Troutner?
We are good.
Okay. All right, so then we will see you back on the 12th.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Do we have any new business that we need to discuss, Janice?
Not this evening, no.
Committee reports?
Yeah, I wanted to just say, tomorrow, the master plan subcommittee is meeting, and there's a lot of zoning changes, I guess, proposed land use changes that we'll be looking at.
God bless you.
Yeah, that's what I say too. God bless us and save us. I'm hoping that we're not going to do this all tomorrow night. Maybe we could break it up a bit. But,
Yeah. You've got quite a list of things to do, I know. So
there are, yeah.
we appreciate your anticipated work.
Yes. So I'm just mentioning that in case anybody's interested. There will be some zoning discussions going on. Mm-hmm.
No, thank you for the progress update.
Yeah.
I see I see your email, so I know that you're setting up the meetings, but it's good that the rest of the board knows it too. Anything else, Janice? Committee-wise?
I have nothing to report, no.
Okay, and bills?
We do have bills.
I have a question.
We do have bills.
I have a question though. Is there any other interesting applications coming down the pike?
You know what? No, I don't have anything that's been filed. The filed applications are pretty mundane, but I've had quite a few requests to meet about potential applications. So I think we should enjoy this lull because it's going to pick up significantly probably in the summer and the fall with some larger applications.
I'm curious. I know David Plasek is looking at Lackawanna Plaza, and I believe that he owns the stretch of land from the police station down to the former office. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that's been vacant and undeveloped and kind of for a long time. Is anything planned with that?
I have not heard from Mr. Plasek.
And the other one is the old Richie Cesaire's. Is anything ever going to be built there? Or
I haven't heard about that either.
And is there anything going on with DeCamp?
No, nobody's come to my office to talk about DeCamp.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I will give the floor to our CFO for his opinion on the bills.
I reviewed the bills and I would move to approve them.
Well, based on that, I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Okay.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for your attention and participation. And stay well, stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, and thank you, John, for giving us some time to think about this.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm sure I was hoping that I wasn't the only one who needed some more time. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys.
Good night.
Have a good evening and good rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.